The tension in the Austin state capitol was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Texas Governor Greg Abbott sat behind his massive oak desk, his face red with anger as he stared down Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. What started as a routine meeting about federal funding had just exploded into the political confrontation of the decade. The governor's office, normally a symbol of Texas power and prestige, had become a battlefield. The massive Texas flag hanging behind Abbott's chair seemed to mock the moment. Here was the state's top leader losing his composure with a fellow Texan who was simply trying to help storm victims. The irony was lost on Abbott, but it wouldn't be lost on the millions who would soon watch this unfold. Stay out of Texas. Abbott's voice echoed through the governor's office, his fist slamming on the desk with such force that his coffee mug jumped. The sound reverberated off the wood-paneled walls like a gunshot, and for a moment, everyone in the room froze. The 35-year-old Dallas Democrat didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward with a smile that would make Abbott regret every word he just said. The cameras that Abbott's team had secretly set up to embarrass Crockett were now capturing something entirely different. A complete meltdown by one of the most powerful governors in America. And the calm, calculated response of a congresswoman who was about to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. What happened in the next 30 seconds would not only leave the Texas governor completely speechless, but would also ignite a political firestorm that reached all the way to Washington, D.C. This wasn't just a political disagreement. This was a generational clash. A battle between old-school political bullying and new-school preparation and principles. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these explosive political moments that are reshaping America. This is the kind of raw, unscripted political theater that shows us who our leaders really are when they think nobody's watching. Crockett's response was so perfectly crafted, so devastatingly effective that within hours, it would be trending nationwide. Political analysts would call it a masterclass in crisis communication, while social media users would turn it into the political meme of the year. But to understand why this moment was so powerful, and why it would ultimately change both of their careers, we need to go back to how this epic confrontation began. On one side sat Greg Abbott, the 66-year-old Republican governor who had ruled Texas with an iron fist for nearly a decade. Abbott wasn't just any politician. He was the wheelchair-bound conservative firebrand who had turned Texas into America's red state. From his massive border wall project to his controversial abortion. As a trained lawyer who had spent years in hostile courtrooms, a politician who had survived brutal campaigns, and a Texas native who knew exactly how to handle bullies. Everything was set up for a political explosion. Abbott was riding high after a successful legislative session, where he'd passed some of the most conservative laws in the country. He felt untouchable, especially in his own state capital. Crockett, meanwhile, was fighting for her political life, knowing that if she couldn't deliver federal aid to her freezing constituents, her career might be over before it really began. The irony was perfect. A powerful male governor who controlled everything in Texas, facing off against a black woman from Dallas, who supposedly had no power at all. Abbott was about to learn that underestimating Jasmine Crockett was the biggest mistake of his political career. The scene was set for a classic David versus Goliath battle. Except, in this case, David had come prepared with more than just a slingshot. Crockett had done her homework, researched Abbott's vulnerabilities, and prepared for exactly the kind of confrontation that Abbott's team was planning. While they were setting up cameras to capture her downfall, she was preparing to turn those same cameras against them. The weather outside seemed to mirror the tension inside. Dark clouds were gathering over Austin, and meteorologists were warning of another potential winter storm. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. While politicians played games in air-conditioned offices, Texans were preparing for another round of suffering that their government seemed powerless to prevent. The tension was obvious from the moment Crockett walked into Abbott's office. The governor didn't even stand up to greet her, a deliberate show of disrespect that his staff later admitted was planned. Instead, he gestured to a chair positioned far from his desk, forcing Crockett to crane her neck to make eye contact. "Congresswoman Crockett," Abbott said with a cold smile, "I understand you want to discuss federal funding for our recent weather emergency." "That's right, Governor," Crockett replied, her voice steady despite the obvious hostility in the room. "My constituents in Dallas are suffering. They need help, and the federal government is ready to provide it." Abbott's expression darkened immediately. "Your constituents? Last I checked, they were Texans first, and Texans take care of themselves. We don't need Washington's help, especially when it comes with strings attached." The first warning sign came when Abbott started lecturing Crockett about Texas independence, as if she weren't a born and raised Texan herself. He talked about the Alamo, about Texas's unique spirit, about how outsiders just didn't understand the Lone Star State. "Governor," Crockett interrupted politely, "with all due respect, I was born in Austin. I grew up in Texas. I went to law school at UT. I think I understand Texas just fine. That's when Abbott's famous temper started to show. His voice got louder, his gestures more aggressive. He began questioning whether Crockett really represented Texas values, or if she was just another liberal Democrat who happened to get elected in a gerrymandered district. You may have been born here, Abbott said, his voice dripping with condescension, but you don't represent real Texas. You represent the radical left agenda that's trying to destroy everything we've built. Crockett remained calm, but those watching could see the fire building in her eyes. Governor, I represent 760,000 Texans who elected me to fight for them. Right now, they need federal emergency aid, and you're blocking it because of your political games. Political games. Abbott's voice was rising now. I'm protecting Texas from federal overreach. I'm standing up for states' rights, something you clearly don't understand. Abbott's staff members were exchanging nervous glances. They'd seen their boss angry before, but this was different. He was taking this personally, and everyone in the room could feel it. Abbott started bringing up Crockett's voting record, attacking her for supporting federal programs he disagreed with. He questioned her loyalty to Texas, suggested she was more interested in making headlines than helping people. You come down here from Washington, Abbott continued, his wheelchair creaking as he leaned forward aggressively, thinking you can tell me how to run my state. Well, let me tell you something about Texas, Congresswoman. But Crockett wasn't backing down. Governor, with respect, I didn't come from Washington. I came from Dallas, from the district where people are still without power because the grid you've been bragging about failed again. That hit a nerve. Abbott's power grid was his biggest weakness. The one issue that could really hurt him politically, and Crockett had just poked it with a sharp stick. Abbott's face was getting redder by the minute. His staff later said they'd never seen him this angry, not even during his worst legislative battles. He started questioning whether Crockett understood the Constitution, whether she respected federalism, whether she even belonged in Congress. Maybe, Abbott said, his voice dripping with venom, if you spent less time on Twitter and more time reading the Constitution, you'd understand why Texas doesn't need lectures from freshman Congress members who think they know better than governors who've been doing this for decades. Crockett's response was measured but firm. Governor, I've read the Constitution plenty of times. I've also read the emergency aid bill that would help my constituents. Have you? The insult was subtle but devastating. Abbott prided himself on his legal knowledge. He'd been attorney general before becoming governor. Suggesting he hadn't read the bill was like questioning his basic competence. Abbott's hands were shaking now, gripping the arms of his wheelchair so tight, his knuckles were white. His staff could see he was about to explode, but there was nothing they could do to stop it. The man who prided himself on never showing weakness was about to have a complete meltdown on camera. His chief of staff made eye contact with the communications director, both of them realizing that their gotcha moment was about to backfire spectacularly. They'd seen Abbott angry before, but this was different. This was personal, and personal anger makes for terrible politics. I've had enough of this, Abbott said through clenched teeth. I've had enough of Washington Democrats coming to Texas and telling us what to do. I've had enough of people like you. The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Everyone in the room could feel what was coming. The moment that would define this entire confrontation, and probably both of their political careers. And that's when he said the words that would define this entire confrontation. Stay out of Texas. Abbott's voice boomed through the office with such force that his coffee mug actually fell off his desk, crashing to the floor. His face was purple with rage, his finger pointing directly at Crockett like he was banishing her from the state. For a split second, the room was completely silent. Abbott's staff stood frozen, horrified by what their boss had just said. The cameras they'd set up to embarrass Crockett were now recording Abbott's meltdown in high definition. But Jasmine Crockett didn't look embarrassed or intimidated. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. The kind of smile that should have warned Abbott he just made a terrible mistake. Stay out of Texas, Crockett repeated, her voice calm and clear. Governor, I think you might be confused about something very important. Abbott was still breathing heavy, thinking he just delivered a knockout punch. He'd used his favorite line, the one that always worked when he wanted to put outsiders in their place. His chest was heaving with the effort of his outburst, and sweat was visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning. For a moment, he looked satisfied, like a boxer who thought he just landed the winning blow. The silence in the room was deafening. Abbott's staff stood frozen like statues, afraid to breathe too loudly. The cameras they'd set up were capturing every second of this moment, though none of them realized yet that they were documenting political suicide rather than political triumph. But Crockett wasn't done. She wasn't even close to done. Her legal training had taught her that the most devastating responses often come after your opponent thinks they've already won. See, Governor, I didn't come to Texas. I've never left Texas. She pulled out her phone and held it up, her movements deliberate and calm. Would you like me to show you my birth certificate? Born in Austin, Texas. Raised in Texas, educated in Texas, elected by Texans. The color was starting to drain from Abbott's face as he realized where this was going. His political instincts, honed over decades of combat, were finally kicking in and telling him he'd made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to take back what he'd said. The words "stay out of Texas" were already echoing in the room, already being captured by his own cameras, already about to become the defining moment of his governorship. But you know what's really interesting, Governor? Crockett continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. She was gaining momentum now, like a prosecutor who had just caught a witness in a lie. You telling me to stay out of Texas when you're the one who's been trying to keep Texas out of America. You've spent your entire governorship fighting against federal programs that help Texans. You refused Medicaid expansion that would have helped 1.4 million Texans get health care. You've sued the federal government over 100 times, fighting against programs that would help Texas families. Abbott tried to interrupt, but Crockett was just getting started. You want to talk about staying out of Texas? How about staying out of Texas women's health care decisions? How about staying out of Texas classrooms, where you're banning books? How about staying out of Texas families' private business? Each point hit like a hammer. Abbott's staff could see their boss trying to formulate a response, but Crockett wasn't giving him a chance. But here's what really gets me, Governor, Crockett said, pulling out a folder from her briefcase. You want to know who's really from outside Texas? Let's talk about your campaign donors. Abbott's eyes went wide. This wasn't supposed to happen. The meeting was supposed to be about federal funding, not his campaign finances. According to your latest campaign finance reports, Crockett continued, reading from the documents, 67% of your major donors live outside of Texas. New York, California, Florida, everywhere except here. The room was dead silent now. Abbott's staff knew this was true, but they never expected anyone to bring it up so directly. So when you take millions of dollars from oil companies in Oklahoma, gas companies in Louisiana, and hedge funds in New York, are you telling them to stay out of Texas too? Or is that just for elected representatives who were actually born here? Abbott was sputtering now, trying to find words. But Crockett delivered the final blow. You know what, Governor? I think I understand the real problem here. You're not mad that I'm interfering in Texas business. You're mad that I'm doing the job you won't do, actually fighting for Texas families instead of fighting against them. She stood up from her chair, gathering her papers with deliberate calm. I came here today to try to help Texas families who are suffering because of your failed policies. You responded by telling me to stay out of my own state. But here's the thing, Governor. I'm not going anywhere. I was elected by Texans to represent Texans, and that's exactly what I'm going to keep doing. Abbott tried one last desperate response. You can't talk to me like that. I'm the governor of Texas. Crockett paused at the door and turned back with that same calm smile. Yes, you are the governor, and I'm a United States Congresswoman. The difference is, I remember that I work for the people, not the other way around. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Abbott sitting in stunned silence, his staff afraid to make eye contact with their humiliated boss. For a full minute after Crockett left, nobody in Abbott's office said a word. The governor sat staring at the door she just walked through, his mouth slightly open, clearly trying to process what had just happened. His chief of staff was the first to speak. Governor, should we release that footage? Abbott's head snapped around. What footage? The cameras we set up to show her as an outsider interfering in Texas business. Another long pause. Abbott looked at the cameras, then back at his staff, then at the coffee stain on his carpet where his mug had fallen. Turn them off, he said quietly. Turn them all off. But it was too late. The damage was already done, and soon the whole world would see exactly what happened when Greg Abbott told Jasmine Crockett to stay out of Texas. 3 hours after the confrontation, someone in Abbott's office did something that would change both their careers forever. They leaked the video. The footage showed up first on an anonymous Twitter account, then spread like wildfire across every social media platform. Within the first hour, Stay Out of Texas was trending nationwide, but not in the way Abbott had hoped. Instead of supporting the governor, Texans were using the hashtag to mock him. The video had been edited to highlight Abbott's meltdown and Crockett's devastating response, making the governor look like an out-of-control bully who got destroyed by a calm, prepared congresswoman. The most viral clip was a 30-second supercut that started with Abbott screaming, "Stay out of Texas," and ended with Crockett's line about remembering that she works for the people. It got 5 million views in the first 6 hours. Twitter was the first platform to catch fire. Progressive accounts immediately started sharing the video with captions like, "This is what happens when a bully meets someone who knows how to fight back." And Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in how to handle GOP bullies. But the real surprise was how many conservative Texans started defending Crockett. A viral tweet from a Republican voter in Houston said, I don't agree with Crockett on everything, but she's right about one thing. She's more of a Texan than Abbott's out-of-state donors. The meme started immediately. Someone created a GIF of Abbott's coffee mug falling with the caption, "When you realize you just messed with the wrong Congresswoman." Another showed Crockett calmly gathering her papers with the text, "That's how you handle a tantrum." TikTok users were even more creative. A video set to dramatic music showing Crockett's best lines got 12 million views overnight. Young people who had never heard of either politician were suddenly sharing clips and calling Crockett a political icon. By the next morning, every major news network was covering the story. CNN's headline read, "Texas Governor's Meltdown Backfires Spectacularly." Fox News tried to defend Abbott, but even their hosts seemed uncomfortable with his behavior. MSNBC's morning show played the entire exchange 3 times, with host Joy Reid calling it one of the most devastating political takedowns I've ever seen. The New York Times ran a front-page story titled, "When Stay Out of Texas Backfired," analyzing how Abbott's attempt to look strong had made him look weak and out of control. But the most damaging coverage came from Texas newspapers. The Dallas Morning News, which had previously been neutral on Abbott, ran an editorial calling his behavior unbecoming of a governor and praising Crockett for showing the kind of leadership Texas deserves. The Houston Chronicle was even harsher, writing that Abbott had embarrassed the state he claims to represent and that Crockett had reminded everyone what real Texas values look like. Abbott's team tried everything to control the narrative. They released a statement saying the video was taken out of context and that the governor was simply defending Texas values, but the full video made it impossible to spin. Everyone could see exactly what happened. Abbott himself tried to tweet his way out of the crisis. "I will always defend Texas against federal overreach, no matter who doesn't like it." But the tweet backfired when thousands of Texans replied with variations of "Crockett is from Texas, genius." His staff arranged friendly interviews on conservative radio shows, but even sympathetic hosts asked uncomfortable questions about why he lost his temper with a fellow Texan who was trying to help storm victims. The worst moment came when Abbott tried to hold a press conference to discuss other issues, and every single question was about the Crockett confrontation. After the 5th reporter asked about his stay out of Texas comment, Abbott abruptly ended the press conference, making him look even more rattled. While Abbott was dealing with crisis management, Crockett was having the best week of her political career. Her office was flooded with interview requests from national media outlets. Speaking invitations poured in from across the country. Her first major interview was with Anderson Cooper on CNN, where she maintained the same calm confidence she'd shown in Abbott's office. "Anderson," she said, "I went to Austin to try to help Texas families who are suffering." The governor responded with a tantrum. "I think that tells you everything you need to know about our different approaches to public service." When Cooper asked if she regretted anything about the confrontation, Crockett's response went viral again. "I regret that it took a public embarrassment for the governor to finally agree to accept federal emergency aid for storm victims. Sometimes you have to speak truth to power, even when power doesn't want to hear it." The confrontation had immediate political consequences. Within a week, Abbott quietly reversed his position on the federal emergency aid, accepting the funds with the environmental requirements he had previously rejected. His spokesman claimed it was always part of the plan, but everyone knew Crockett had forced his hand. More importantly, the incident changed how people viewed both politicians. Abbott, who had built his brand on being a strong conservative leader, suddenly looked petty and thin-skinned. Crockett, meanwhile, was being talked about as a rising star in the Democratic Party and a potential statewide candidate in Texas. Democratic fundraising emails featuring the confrontation raised millions of dollars in small donations. Republican donors, meanwhile, started asking uncomfortable questions about whether Abbott was still the right leader for Texas. Political analysts immediately recognized that this moment could be a turning point for Texas politics. For years, Abbott had dominated the state by positioning himself as the defender of Texas against outside interference. But Crockett had flipped that script, making Abbott look like the outsider who was more connected to out-of-state donors than Texas.